everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this CREST member webinar from Arcturus. I will be handing over to Simon Fletcher, who will be your presenter very shortly, who will be talking from SIEM to SOC, bridging the chasm. Very interesting subject that I'm sure you're all looking forward to listening to today. But before I hand over to Simon, just to let you know, you do have the opportunity to ask any questions that you want to at the end of this webinar. So please feel free to type those questions into the question pane or into the chat function, and we can ask them of Simon at the end. So thank you very much once again for attending today, and thank you so much, Simon, for coming on and doing this presentation. It's great to have you here today, and I will hand over to you. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much for having me. Welcome everybody. My name's Simon Fletcher. I work for Arcturus, who are part of the Cyberthought group. And this presentation is largely around my experience, actually, of building a security operations team. Arcturus was primarily a penetration testing company. And then a couple of years ago, we took the decision to also move into the security operations space. And we built out a SOC. And this is largely a lot of the learnings that I gained doing that process, but also answers a lot of the questions that we get when we talk to a lot of our clients. So the target audience for this talk generally is people who are looking to either build their own SOC or have bought a SIEM in the past. And when we talk about SIEM, we're talking about a security information and event management system. And basically anyone who is looking to implement these, they're probably looking to centralize all their logs and possibly look for anomalies in the data of those logs. And they're probably concerned around cyber attack, and they're hoping to be proactive in trying to detect those attacks before it's too late. But as I said, we've spoken to a lot of people who've bought the tooling, but they really haven't felt like they've got the return on investment. So if that sounds like you, then this hopefully will be of use to you. The main problem that most of our clients have when they're in this early stages of building out their security operations team is that they end up with alert fatigue. The SIEM itself may generate hundreds and thousands of alerts, and they don't know what to do with them. And often they come to us and say that they either need more analysts to handle all these alerts, or they just don't know what to do. And the problem with that is that even if you do employ an army of analysts to manage your hundreds of thousands of alerts being generated by your SIEM, is that those analysts are going to get desensitized. They're just going to be, you're going to see it as a low-paid or low-skilled job, and you're just going to have analysts just clicking on a lot of false positives, and they're just going to be more likely to miss those real alerts because they're just desensitized to them. So this seems to be a common problem that we're having a lot, and it seems to be just that the system is just generating too much noise, and people don't feel like they're getting the value for money out of it. So basically, this whole talk is about how to reduce that noise. Despite what the vendors will tell you, when you take it out of the box, the SIEM itself isn't going to magically spot indicators of compromise within your organization, not without quite a bit of work on your part. It is quite an essential tool. I often use the sort of mechanics tools. Just because I've got some shiny tools doesn't mean I can service my car. I'm still going to need some skilled people who can use those tools to drive it for me. It's worth remembering before I go on actually why we want a security operations team in the first place. This is some data from a report that was done last year on ransomware, and analysed lots of ransomware attacks and brought out some really useful data. And this is just one aspect of that. And it focuses on the primary attack vector, how the attackers got in initially before they triggered it. But the part that I found really, really interesting was that 13 days, the average number of days that the actors were in an organization before they triggered the encryption process. And we come across a lot of people who think that if they hit by ransomware, it happens in minutes or hours, and the reality is actually days and weeks. We actually had a client who we were talking to, and unfortunately in the very early stages of our engagement and sales process, they actually got hit by ransomware. So obviously we helped out where we could, but when we did some analysis on it, what we found out was that about 3 weeks earlier, one of their users had clicked on an email, opened the attachment which had ransomware, well, had malware attached to it, and they realized it was phishing at the time. So they actually reported it to their IT team and said, look, I've just opened this phishing email, I've just opened this attachment. And the IT team, either because they were just too busy or they didn't know what to do or what to look for, looked around, saw that the lights were still on, and sort of thought, well, actually, it looks like we had a bit of a near miss there. Good luck. Thanks for reporting it, and did nothing about it. And unbeknown to everybody else, that malware sat dormant on that user's machine, listening for credentials. When the user logged on to various systems, it sent those credentials off to the attackers until the attackers got some credentials they could use from outside to log into the environment, and in that time they could move around the environment, they could gain control, they could compromise more and more systems, they could escalate their privileges within the estate, find those important systems and important data, find the backups, and only when they felt like they had complete control of the estate did they actually trigger the encryption process. And what is really interesting to me and why it's relevant to this talk is that in all that time from that initial compromise, as they were moving around, as they were compromising systems and elevating their privileges, they were setting off red flags. There was messaging within the event data that should have been being collected that should have notified the organization that that compromise had happened, and they should have been able to react. But unfortunately, there was no one listening to those red flags. There was no one looking at those alerts, and no one who could identify that this was actually going on until it was too late. So your security operations team, you assume that one of your security controls has already failed, and actually your security operations teams earn their money identifying those compromises so that you can react before it comes too impactful on your organization, and try and minimize the impact of that compromise. So how do we reduce that noise? The first thing I would say is that you need to reduce the amount of information coming out of the system. You have to reduce the amount of information going in. So you need to sanitize your log sources. Again, if you talk to your vendor will tell you you need to ingest all your logs, because that's going to mean that you're going to need to buy a bigger license, and he's going to get a more commission, and he can go on a nice holiday this year, which is nice for him, but it doesn't help you, right? You're trying to get control, and you're trying to understand and flag up these indicators of compromise, and you can't do that if you've got too much noise. So we talk about having a staged approach to bringing on those log sources into your SIEM. The first stage, we talk around having your next generation firewalls, your intrusion detection and prevention systems, your proxy URLs, your domain controllers, and your antivirus systems. And then once you've got control of all the alerts that are coming from those log sources, and only when you feel like you're in control of those, do you actually then want to go on to your cloud applications, your next generation sort of antivirus, your data loss protection, your web application firewalls, and those critical logs from those critical assets. And only again when you've actually got control of all that do you even want to think about bringing on everything else. And in fact, you probably don't want to bring on everything else unless, of course, you need to for regulatory requirements. You're probably going to get all the information you want from these log sources. Before you even proceed, you're also going to need to know your state. we are often amazed at how often we can ask our customers, what are your critical assets? And either they can't answer at all, which is not surprising, or if we do ask what your critical assets are, if there's more than one person in the room, we don't get the same answer. Everyone has a different view on what your critical assets are. So you need to understand your estate. You need to understand what is critical, what is it that you want to protect, because you're not going to be able to write effective use cases unless you know what you're trying to protect. I'll come on to use cases in a minute, so don't worry about that. But also you're going to want to know that when you have your system has detected potential compromise, you want to know who you can actually escalate that to. So you need to know your estate, you need to know what's critical, and you need to know who is the owners, who are the administrators of that, so you can escalate that. If you don't know that, you're probably going to need to do sort of a discovery project first before you start trying to implement a security operations team. Now, I mentioned use cases. Some people, it's a fancy term basically for grouping of rules. So SIEMs have rules that look through the data to look for those anomalies. And we really recommend not just creating arbitrary rules. We see a number of clients who think that they're creating rules that are looking for things that they're interested in, but actually what happens is that those rules, they haven't thought them through properly, and often they haven't thought about what the actions are off the back of those, and it doesn't help them at all. So a use case basically is a logical grouping of rules based on what the threat is that they're looking for and what the action you want to take is. And if you group your rules in that way, it's going to make it much more it's going to make it much easier to build effective rules that are not generating too much noise than if you just create arbitrary rules. And there's a number of frameworks available to help you sort of map those use cases to. We use the MITRE ATT&CK, for example, and those attack frameworks sort of show the steps that an attacker would need to take from the reconnaissance stage all the way through to like the exfiltration of data or the impact of the encryption process. So all the steps that the attacker would need to take, and that maps nicely onto what you're probably going to be looking for. So for MITRE ATT&CK, for example, you know, it goes from reconnaissance through to the initial access, through to persistence, privilege escalation, evasion, lateral movement, command and control, and exfiltration, and so forth. So at all those stages of the attacker's path to compromising your state, there are things that you can look for, and that's where you build your use cases and your rules to look for things all the way along that use case. Data enrichment. So obviously your SIEM, once you've written your good use cases, is creating useful alerts. But often, if you look at an alert, they don't often have a lot of information. They often just say this asset, this user did this thing on this asset, and on its own, it doesn't mean much. The first thing the analyst is going to have to do is try and find out who that user is, what that asset is, and whether they should be doing that. And actually, that is information we can actually help by building automations in so that that data is enriched, so that the user can see that, well, actually, you know, then they're going to be less concerned around a user who is a Linux system administrator doing something on a Linux machine that they're supposed to be administering. That's not so much of a concern. But if someone in marketing is doing some administrative commands on your domain controller, that's probably more of a concern. So instead of having your analyst having to hunt for that information every time there's an alert, what you want to do is build automation so it brings that information in and it is presented within the alert, so that your analyst can then effectively has all the information at their fingertips to make that decision without having to look around elsewhere, and they can quickly either discard it as a false positive or validate it and say, yes, this is something genuinely we need to look at, and do the analysis of it. it's all about speed. So by reducing our false positives and building this enrichment, reduces the amount of time the analyst is going to spend on each alert, because the analyst time is going to be your most expensive cost. Yeah, you may spend a lot of money on your SIEM, but that's not going to compare to anything to the amount of analyst time. So you're going to want to make sure your analysts are not doing mundane work. You're going to want to make sure that you've employed some skilled people, and you want to use them for their skills, not for doing mundane routine tasks. You're going to want to develop some run books. You're going to want to make sure all your processes are really well defined, and that those escalation points are up to date, so you know who to contact. Because when that alert is validated, you're going to want to act fast, and it's really important that everybody knows what to do and who to involve, and your run books are going to give you that. Obviously, we talked about a huge
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's my phone. We talked about being overwhelmed with alerts. Obviously, we need to actually optimize those alerts so that there's less. But the main point of this slide is that actually is it's a continuous process and not a one-off process. We often, again, we get clients who come to us and say, oh, we just need you to tune these alerts, and then we say it's actually quite a lot of work, because actually it's continuous. And what you really want to do is build a culture within your team where there's a feedback loop between your analysts and your engineers, so they're continuously trying to improve the alerts and reduce those false positives. You may want to create a KPI for the percentage of alerts that are flagged as false positive, and always be looking to reduce that. And that's only going to work if your engineers and your analysts are working together and constantly looking to reduce that target instead of letting it get out of control. So it's a continual process. I've also mentioned automation here. SOR tools, or security orchestration, automation and response tools, are obviously very popular, and rightly so. Probably something for your more mature security operations team as your team matures, but you are going to want to try and take away, as I said, that mundane tasks away from your analysts. So if you have alerts that have got a high level of confidence, and actually the analyst doesn't need to really make a decision, don't need a human decision on it, then you probably want to be looking to automate that. So again, it's all about optimizing all the processes and all the automation, so that you reduce the amount of time that your analysts are spending on alerts. As you probably got from the gist from the last few slides, your objective is to reduce your time to respond, and that's from selecting your log sources so that you're not getting too much noise, tuning your rules so that you don't get too many false positives, and that the alerts are providing actionable events, and that the data is enriched so that your analysts can validate them quickly without having to look at other systems. And then when they're validated, the playbooks are all up to date, so that actually everybody knows what to do and who to involve. And all this reduces that time to respond. I know I said earlier that you potentially got 13 days to do this, but don't assume that you have got that 13 days. You don't want to be spending 24 hours or 48 hours from an alert being raised to actually someone doing something. You want that time to be down into minutes if you can. And all this that we're talking about at the moment is all about reducing that time to respond. One of the things you do have to accept is that there are limitations to your tooling. Your SIEM can only do so much. It can only look for what you've effectively programmed it to look for, and it won't see all attacks. It won't see necessarily new attacks, and also slow attacks is probably quite likely to miss as well. So you're going to need some people in your team to proactively look around your estate to see what's lurking, to see what is potentially being missed by your SIEM. taking in information from the latest threat intel and so forth to look for what your system hasn't been picked up. And you just have to accept that there's always going to be some known unknowns, basically. Now, people, process and technology, this is used a lot within IT anyway. It really is important for your security operations center. So many people that we talk to seem to focus on the technology. They've just built a SIEM, they've just bought a SIEM, they've got this, spent a fortune. Their CISO's just come back from a big trade show where he stood on a very expensive stand and met a very nice man who sold him a very nice tool. And he's come back and he's thrown it at you to implement. It's the wrong way round. You really want to focus on the people. The people are the most important part of your team. If you get your people right, they will write good processes and the technology will work. Whereas if you get the technology right, but you don't invest the time in the people, then it's still not going to work. If you don't have good people and you've got the greatest technology, it's never going to work. But vice versa, if you've got great people, even if the technology is not the best, they're still going to make it do something useful. In fact, when I built our SOC, I started with the people. I employed the team, and actually, obviously, they developed the processes, which was great. But I also let the choice of technology go to them, and they looked at the market, and they actually chose Elastic Security for their technology. There's a lot of tools out there, but they liked it, and it matched my budget, so I was happy with that, and they're very happy with it. I wouldn't want to force a tool onto my team that they're not happy working with. So people first, then your processes, and then the technology last. Obviously, I've mentioned there around your people being important, but what skills are you going to need in your SOC? Well, there's quite a few people you're going to need. All this infrastructure you built, all this SIEMs, you're probably going to need other systems such as ticketing systems, knowledge bases, incident platforms, and so forth, and SOAR tools. They're going to need system admins to manage that infrastructure. So you're going to need someone to manage that. You're going to need your content authors, people to write your use cases and to write your runbooks. And engineers and your analysts will help to develop that content. Your SOC analysts, these are the people who are obviously going to be responding to those alerts. Traditionally, we had your sort of the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 analysts with an army of tier 1s, some tier 2s, and a handful of tier 3s. Today with SOAR, the jobs for the tier 1s is diminishing. So actually, with a lot less tier 1s, you can still perform tasks. So you can have a handful of tier 1s who are your sort of graduates and your trainees coming up, and then your tier 2s are doing the most of the work, which is the intelligence stuff, and your tier 3 guys are doing the sort of like the supervising and the more advanced stuff. You're going to need those threat hunters who are going to be looking for that stuff that the SIEM's not looking for, fed by your threat intelligence, and your threat intelligence will feed your threat hunters and your content authors and your analysts, so they can all update the system and they can all use that information to look for new threats. And you're going to need people who can manage the incident responders. So when the analyst has validated the alert, they can hand it over to an incident responder, who can then go and talk to the organization and find the people who they need to do and follow those run books and get the incident resolved. And then you're going to need to someone to manage all these people. Now, if you've got a small team, you can have people wearing multiple hats, and then if you've got a large team, you may have dedicated people doing dedicated roles. So to summarize, I can't stress how important attracting and retaining your talent is. I mean, this is CREST, and obviously they are the essence of cybersecurity skills pretty much in the industry. So there is a huge drain on the market. Your biggest challenge is going to be attracting and retaining talent. Everyone's trying to build a SOC at the moment, so it's really hard. So you've got to really think about how you're going to attract that team and how you're going to retain them. Obviously, we've talked about tuning, that continuing improvement process, constantly trying to make sure that you're minimizing that time to respond with automations and up-to-date use cases and solid runbooks. And then ultimately your target is to get to less than 10 alerts. I know I said less than sort of 50 earlier, but actually that's just probably a first goal. Your next goal needs to be less than 10, and actually, you know, we're aiming for less than 10. We're less than 5. You know, we want to make sure that we're actually only 3 to 5 alerts per analyst is being raised per day, so that those alerts are of value and are genuinely need looking into, and the analyst has all the time to actually invest into looking into that unusual circumstance, as against just being something that's not just false positives, and that's it. And that's me done.
That's great. Thank you so much, Simon. Very interesting presentation there. And as it says on the screen, do you have any questions? So this is your opportunity, please, to type any questions into the question pane that you want, and we can get them asked of Simon whilst we have him here. So we have had a couple of questions come in, Simon, already. So the first one is, how many people do you need in a SOC?
I would say the minimum you're going to need is 5 to 6. As I said, people can wear multiple hats. So your tier 3 analysts can be your threat hunters as well. Obviously, depending on the size of your organization, really, and how complex it is. But it can scale up to much more than that, depending on the size of your organization. As I said, it's all the way through it's all going to depend on what you're looking for and how many alerts you're going to generate, and how complex your estate is. But you're not going to be able to do much with less than 5 people.
That's great. Thank you very much. And as I say, any of the questions that you do ask, if you have a follow-up question to any of the answers, then please feel free to type those into the question pane as well. So the next question is, so what is your target number of alerts?
So as you noticed during the presentation, that we started off saying sort of between 50 and 20, which is a good first target. But even 50 alerts is for an analyst in a day is like 8 minutes per alert. It doesn't leave them a lot of time, and that's not allowing time for them to have a break. As I said on the last slide, you want to be aiming really for less than 10, and the reality is, you know, 3 to 5. You really do want to get those numbers down to single digits, so that you can manage those alerts and actually give them the time that they need, because ultimately these are likely to be indicating some sort of compromise in your estate, and you don't want someone to feel rushed or hurried on that.
Great, thank you very much. And we've got one around recruitment here. So they're asking, what are the biggest challenges to recruit people into a SOC?
So we obviously offer SOC services. So actually it's probably harder for us because we're commercial. Whereas if you're on a client side, if you've got your business does other primary business, then the SOC doesn't have to generate profit. It's a cost center. But ultimately, you don't want to overwork your team. It's the same as most recruitment in a talent pool which is small. Is that if people can go and get a job elsewhere for, you know, the same sort of money but have a better life, they will. So you need to create a culture that the team technical people want to work in, where they're not feeling overworked, but they're feeling challenged, right? And that's there's a subtlety between challenged and overworked. And you want to make sure that the team want to basically enjoy their work, and they're feeling those challenges. And only then are you going to be able to retain your talent. Attracting, well, that's always a challenge, but you need to obviously make sure that the job looks appealing, and that you've got to be very aware that the market's very, very competitive out there. You need to make sure you pay competitive rates, but it's not always just about pay. You won't be able to offer people career progression. The CREST exams is perfect. You know, we push all our guys through CREST exams and encourage them to do that, because although every time I ask one of my guys to take a CREST exam, they become more qualified and their market rate goes up, and I probably have to pay them more. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that someone is developing their career. I get a better skilled individual at the end of it, and they get a career path, and they get sort of, you know, a career that they're enjoying. So yeah, for me, it's about making sure, not just about money, but making sure you create a culture that people want to work in, and making sure that people have that career path ahead of them.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Simon. So there's sort of two questions in this one, really. So what is your view of SOCs which are not operating 24/7, but are instead only during office hours? And how does an L1 SOC analyst up their skills to progress to L2?
Okay, both good questions. So taking the first one, I'm split. I mean, we do have operators who operate 24/7. Obviously, you can't do that with a small team of 5 people. I think you need about 4 people to fill 1 seat that would normally be filled by 1 person 9 to 5 to fill that for 24/7. So if you have even just 2 analysts, then you're talking about 8 analysts all of a sudden to go 24/7. So it's a huge investment to go 24/7. However, as I mentioned, a lot of these compromises often don't happen within minutes. They often are much slower. So the question you've also got to ask is, if an alert goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning and we have an analyst who analyzes it and does it, is there going to be anybody available to actually respond to it? And if the answer is no, then it's not necessarily always that useful to have a team overnight doing it. If your IT team doesn't operate 24/7, if your client isn't up 24/7, then maybe it's not necessarily the first step you should go. It may be better that you go 9 to 5, and then once you've seen the return on the investment from the 9 to 5, then think about going 24/7, because it does provide a big cost to you to go 24/7. The second part of your question around the L1 and the SOC, obviously, if you're an L1 SOC analyst, then there is, I think someone said once that the learning and training is 10% from direct training, 30% from indirect training, which is people working with people and working off mentors and so forth, and then the other 60% is just experience. If you're in an L1 SOC, hopefully your company is investing in you and encouraging you to take CREST exams, for example. There's a good way to go. There's a lot of free resources out there that you can learn. You can do capture the flags. It's always useful to look at the pen testing side as well, so the red teaming as well as the blue teaming. It's good to have a look at the other side of the fence. And obviously, you know, CRESTCon's coming up shortly. There's going to be lots of presentations and useful information from all the conferences through the year that you can learn from. So there's lots of resources. It's just about, you know, putting in the time to learn from them.
Great, thank you so much for that one. So moving on to the next question. Sometimes this person's saying sometimes we do not get enough log sources to create a meaningful use case. So how do we approach it, especially to target the most important use cases?
So they don't get enough log sources to build out a use case. Okay, I'm not quite sure on that one. I would probably have to refer to one of my techs who I don't think is on the call, but
that's great. Were you talking about Sam, were you, Simon?
yeah, I was, yeah.
Lovely. Well, Sam is here. So what I'm going to do, hopefully Sam is listening. So Sam, if I unmute you now, perhaps you could take that one. That'd be lovely. You're unmuted, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you. So to answer that question, we wouldn't build, or I don't conventionally build use cases against log sources. The use case should be built against a problem statement, and then the rules that sit underneath that. Once you've defined that, your log sources should naturally come in. But answering the question, we don't do that. And sorry, this is the first time I've actually come across that, so I'm a little bit stumped. I would say, yeah, that's not something I've ever done, so I'm afraid I couldn't answer the question directly as what do you do if you haven't got the log sources. Try looking at the what you're trying to solve in the opposite way. What's the problem statement you're trying to address, and build your use case around that. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Sam.
That's
Perfect.
great. Thank you, Sam. Much appreciated there. So if you have got anything else that you want to add to that question at all, then please feel free to do that, or you can email us afterwards. So anybody who has any questions afterwards and would like to direct them through to Simon, I'm sure that we can get them over to him. If you email us through to marketing@crest-approved.org, then we can get those over for you. So thank you. Next question. Now this is a little bit more of an opinion, really. They're asking you. So they're asking you, what is your view on an internal SOC versus an MSSP SOC? So I think really what they're sort of saying is, I know they're going to ask you, is it better to go internal or external? But I suppose you could just give what you think some of the benefits would be on that.
Yeah, so I suppose I'm a little bit biased because we offer SOC services to clients, but the fact of the matter is that if you've got an internal SOC, then they probably know your systems better, they probably know your organization better, so they're much closer, but they don't then benefit from an MSSP or an MDR provider that has necessarily the breadth of visibility of multiple organizations. So there is pros and cons on both sides. What I would say is that if you've got an internal SOC, then normally you're less cost centric. So if your company has got sufficient budget, then they can spend more money on it and be less concerned around trying to generate a profit, whereas your MSP is always going to try and be trying to generate a profit. But an organization may struggle to attract that talent if their core business isn't cybersecurity, whereas an organization whose core business is cybersecurity, it may be easier for them to attract good talent. So again, yeah, there's pros and cons on both sides.
Great, thank you so much for that one, Simon. Now I'm hoping you might know what this person means, because I'm not 100% sure, but it might make sense to you when I give you the question. So it says, how about sizing in SOC or SIEM? And then there's a question mark, and then event per second or FPM.
Right, okay. I mean, obviously we do some capacity planning, and it's often the question we ask. Well, certainly when most vendors will talk around, how many events you're taking on and how long you want to retain them. When we talk to our clients and we're trying to price out, you know, a service for them. They don't normally know that, so we end up having to try and work with them to understand it. It's a bit of a dark art. I will not lie. A lot of the time, companies just actually have to sort of suck it and see. I think a lot of the vendors make a lot of their money from underselling in a license to start with, and then all of a sudden the platform requires much more than they initially thought, and then someone has to write a big check. There is no easy answer to sizing from what I can tell, other than, you know, looking at your log sources in the first place to identify, well, which log sources do I need to take on, as against just taking on everything. I hope that answers the question.
That is great. Thank you so much. I'm glad you had that one. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon. So we are just nearing the end of the presentation, and thank you so much for everybody coming on today, and thank you so much for all your very interesting conversations. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to Simon and Arcturus today for coming on and doing that presentation. If you have colleagues that were registered and would like to watch it, they can go to webinar and watch that, and also shortly we will have it edited and out on the CREST YouTube channel so that you can share it with colleagues and other people within the industry. So just to let you know, Simon, we've had some thank yous coming through on the question pane, so a big thank you again to you today, and I will just hand over to you to say a last few words.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I don't really like presenting, I must say, but it's been a real pleasure. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone really takes something from this. It is really about giving a little bit back, and not just always taking. So I'm glad people found it useful.
That's great, they did, and thank you so much, Simon. And yeah, I can't say you might not like presenting, but you did it exceptionally well, so well done. So thank you for that, and thank you to everybody else that attended today. I hope you have a really good rest of the day wherever you are in the world, and take care, and hopefully see you back on another webinar soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.